I have lived long enough to notice something about people. The ones everybody fears are not always the dangerous ones, and the ones everybody overlooks well. Sometimes they are the bravest of all. I learned this truth many years ago on a mountain in the West, watching two wounded souls find each other when no one else was looking. The wagon wheel stopped. Grace looked up from her hands chapped, folded tight in her lap, and saw the cabin clinging to the mountain's side like something that refused to die. Smoke curled from the chimney. A shadow moved behind the window, then vanished. Her father did not step down. He reached behind the seat, pulled out her carpet bag, and held it toward her without meeting her eyes. She took it. The leather handle was cold. The brass clasp caught the afternoon light. Somewhere below, Copper Bend sat in its valley, already forgetting her name. Grace, her father started. She climbed down before he could finish. The wagon creaked. Wheels turned. Dust rose and settled. She stood alone on the path, carpetbag in hand, facing a door that had not opened. Then she noticed the flowers, wildflowers, planted along the steps, deliberate, careful. Someone here wanted something to live. If this story speaks to you, I would love to know where you are watching from today. And if you have been enjoying these stories without subscribing, I kindly invite you to join our little community. It helps more than you know. The door opened without sound. Grace stepped inside. The smell hit first wood smoke, dried herbs, something simmering on the cast iron stove. Her eyes adjusted. Clean plank floors, a table with 2 chairs, a rifle hung above the stone fireplace, dust thick on the barrel. Books lined a shelf near the window. Spines cracked, pages soft from use. She had not expected books. A pot bubbled on the stove. Stew. Venison? Maybe? Her stomach tightened. She had not eaten since yesterday's cold biscuit. She set her carpetbag by the door and stood in the center of the room. Hands clasped, unsure where to put herself. The back door swung open. He filled the frame. Taller than she remembered from the single time she had seen him in town. Signing papers at the lawyer's office, shoulders broad enough to block the light. He carried split wood stacked against his chest, and he did not look at her. As he crossed to the wood box and knelt to stack each piece with care. The scar ran from his left ear to the edge of his jaw, pale against weathered skin. Old. He rose, wiped his hands on his trousers, nodded once. No words. He moved to the stove, ladled stew into 2 tin bowls, set them on the table, pulled out a chair, sat, began to eat. Grace lowered herself into the other chair. The bowl steamed in front of her. She picked up the spoon. The first bite burned her tongue, but she swallowed anyway. They ate in silence. His hands moved rough, calloused, but precise. He tore bread from the loaf, placed half on her side of the table before she could reach. He had been watching her without seeming to watch. When the bowls were empty, he stood, carried both to the wash basin, his back to her, shoulders tight beneath his shirt. He paused at the doorway to the back rooms. "Left bedroom is yours." His voice came out rough, scraped raw from disuse. "Door has a lock. Use it if you want." He did not turn around. He did not wait for an answer. His boots crossed the floor. A door closed somewhere in the back of the cabin. Grace sat alone at the table. The fire crackled. The herbs swayed on their drying strings. On the windowsill, a small carved horse caught the last of the evening light. Worn smooth, held by hands that had loved it. Whose hands? Grace woke to silence. Gray light pushed through the oiled paper window. The fire in the main room had burned down to embers. She could smell the ash, faint and cold. She lay still beneath the wool blanket, listening. No footsteps, no clatter of pots, nothing but the creak of the cabin settling against the mountain wind. She rose. Her feet found the plank floor, cool through her stockings. She had slept in her dress, too uncertain of this place to undress fully. The fabric was wrinkled now, creased along her hips and stomach in ways that reminded her of what she was, what she had always been. The main room stood empty. The stove was cold. No coffee. No sign of him. She moved to the window and looked out at the morning. Mist clung to the pines. The sky hung low and pale. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a bird called once and went quiet. Then she heard it. A voice. Low. Almost not a voice at all. More like humming. Coming from the small structure behind the cabin, the stable, if you could call it that. Rough-hewn boards and a slanted roof, barely large enough for 2 horses. Grace pulled her shawl from the hook by the door and stepped outside. The air bit at her cheeks. Her breath fogged in front of her. She crossed the packed dirt yard, her boots crunching on frost-stiffened grass, and stopped at the stable door. It stood open a few inches, enough to see. Hunter knelt in the straw. A chestnut mare lay on her side. Head lifted, eyes rolling white at the edges. Her left foreleg was wrapped in cloth stained dark with salve. Old wire cuts. Grace realized the kind that came from traps left too long in the ground. Hunter's hands moved over the wound, slow, gentle. His fingers the same fingers that had gripped the axe, that had carried the wood, now traced the edges of the bandage with a touch so light it seemed impossible. And he was singing. Not singing. Exactly. Humming. A tune Grace almost recognized. An old hymn. The kind her grandmother used to hum while kneading bread. The melody drifted through the gap in the door, low and rough and achingly tender. The mare's breathing steadied, her eyes softened. She leaned her great head toward Hunter's chest, and he let her. His hand came up to rest on her neck. And he kept humming, kept that sound going like a thread holding something fragile together. Grace's throat tightened. She had never seen a man touch anything that way. She shifted her weight. The floorboard beneath her boot groaned. Hunter's head snapped up to a mouth. The humming stopped. His eyes found her through the gap, and for one moment, before the walls came back, she saw them. Not cold, not hard, not the eyes of the man the town whispered about. Wounded. The same look the mare had. The same look Grace saw in her own mirror every morning when she forced herself to meet her own gaze. Then it was gone. He stood, brushed straw from his knees, nodded once, that curt gesture she was beginning to recognize, and walked toward the door. She stepped aside to let him pass. He did not look at her again, but she followed him back to the cabin, stood in the doorway while he washed his hands in the basin. "The mare," she said. "What happened to her?" He dried his hands on a rag, took his time. "Found her on the north trail, week and a half back. leg caught in old trapping wire. Someone left it there years ago. He hung the rag on its hook. She would have died if I had not cut her loose. You have been treating her since then. A nod. Grace stepped closer. I could help. If you show me what to do. He turned, looked at her fully for the first time since she had arrived. His jaw was tight, the scar a pale line against his weathered skin. Then he reached up to the shelf above the basin and brought down a brown glass bottle, held it toward her. She took it. Their fingers brushed, and he pulled back as if the touch had burned him. His hand dropped to his side. He did not meet her eyes. Liniment, he said. Apply it twice a day. Keep the bandage clean. She held the bottle, felt its weight. The glass was cool against her palm. What is her name? She asked. He paused at the door, his back to her, his shoulders tight. No name. Every creature has a name. Not this one. His voice was flat. Naming things makes losing them worse. He walked out. The door swung shut behind him. Grace stood alone in the cabin, holding the bottle of liniment. Outside, she could hear him splitting wood. The rhythm of the axe steady and relentless. She thought of the mare lying in the straw, the way Hunter's hands had moved over her wound, the way his voice had softened into something almost like prayer. Naming things makes losing them worse. She understood that. She had named things too. Dreams, hopes, a future that never came. And losing them had hollowed her out in ways she still could not speak about. But the mare deserved a name. Every wounded thing did. That afternoon, Grace walked back to the stable alone. The mare lifted her head when she entered. Those dark eyes watched her, wary, but not afraid. Grace knelt in the straw, opened the bottle, began to unwrap the bandage. Hope, she said quietly. That is your name now. Hope. The mare's ear flicked toward her voice. She held still while Grace applied the liniment, gentle as she had seen Hunter do it. When she finished, she sat back on her heels and looked at the animal. He does not want to name you because he is afraid of losing you. But I think he has already lost too much to stop now. The mare blinked, her dark eyes calm now, as if she knew she was safe. That evening, Grace found a book outside her bedroom door. Jane Eyre. The spine cracked, the pages soft. No note, no explanation. She picked it up and held it to her chest. Somewhere in the cabin. Hunter moved, a chair scraped. The stove door opened and closed. He had not spoken to her since morning, but he had left her this. She opened the cover. On the first page, in faded pencil, a woman's handwriting curved across the paper. A name, a date, a single word beneath beloved. The handwriting was not Hunter's. Whose book had this been? Days passed. Grace lost count of how many. She woke each morning before dawn, dressed in the gray light, and walked to the main room to find the stove already warm. Hunter rose earlier than she did. She never heard him, never caught him in the act of building the fire. But the evidence was always there. Embers glowing, coffee warming in the pot, a quiet offering she did not know how to acknowledge. They fell into rhythm without speaking of it. She cooked breakfast eggs from the small coop behind the stable, biscuits from the flour barrel, salt pork fried crisp in the iron skillet. He ate without comment, but he cleaned his plate. She noticed that He made supper stew mostly, or roasted rabbit, or beans with fatback. Simple food. Filling. He set her portion in front of her and sat across the table, and they ate in silence that grew less uncomfortable with each passing meal. She began to explore the property. Behind the cabin, past the woodpile and the outhouse, she found it. A garden plot, maybe 20 feet square, bordered by stones someone had placed with care, but the weeds had taken over. Thistle and crabgrass choked what remained of the rows. A few stubborn onion tops pushed through the tangle. Pale and struggling, Grace stood at the edge and studied it. Her back ached just looking at the work ahead. Her knees would protest. Her hands would blister. She knelt anyway. The soil was cool beneath her fingers. She pulled the first weed, shook the dirt from its roots, tossed it aside. Then another. Then another. She worked through the morning. The sun climbed. Sweat gathered at her temples, slid down the back of her neck. Her dress clung to her body in ways that made her conscious of every fold, every curve, but no one was watching. No one was here to see. She kept pulling. By midday, her shoulders burned. Her fingernails were black with dirt. She had cleared maybe a quarter of the plot, enough to see the bones of what it had been. Rows for beans, she guessed. Tomatoes. Squash. Someone had planned this garden with intention. She sat back on her heels and wiped her forehead with her sleeve. A shadow fell across the cleared earth. Hunter stood at the edge of the plot, a tin cup in each hand. He held one toward her. Water. She could see the condensation beating on the metal. She took it. Drank. The water was cold, drawn fresh from the well. He did not speak. He looked at the cleared ground, then at her dirt-stained hands, then at the pile of weeds she had made. Something shifted in his face, not quite a softening, but a loosening of the tight line around his jaw. He turned and walked back toward the woodpile, picked up the axe, resumed his work. Grace finished the water and set the cup aside. She went back to weeding. That evening, she read aloud. She had started Jane Eyre the night before, sitting by the fire with the book open in her lap. Hunter sat in the chair across from her, a block of wood in one hand and a whittling knife in the other. He did not look at her. He did not acknowledge the reading. But he did not leave either. She read of Jane's loneliness, her hunger for something more, her stubborn refusal to be diminished. The knife moved over the wood. Shavings curled and fell to the floor. When Grace closed the book, Hunter rose without a word and went to his room. But the next evening, he was in the same chair, waiting, the knife in his hand, the wood taking shape. She did not ask what he was carving. She simply opened the book and continued. The boy appeared on the 5th day. Grace was hanging wash on the line her spare dress. A few of Hunter's shirts she had taken upon herself to launder when she saw movement at the tree line. She froze, a clothespin in her hand. A child stepped out from behind a pine. Thin, dirty, maybe 10 years old. Maybe younger, hard to tell with the hollows in his cheeks. He wore trousers too big for him, held up by a rope belt. His shirt was patched at both elbows. He did not approach. He stood at the edge of the trees and watched her with eyes too old for his face. The stable door opened. Hunter emerged, his hand resting on the door frame. His face went hard when he saw the boy. Then something else moved through it. Something Grace could not name. He lifted his chin. A gesture. "Come here." The boy crossed the yard. His feet were bare. He walked carefully, avoiding the sharper stones. Hunter turned and went into the cabin. The boy followed. Grace abandoned the wash and followed them both. Inside, Hunter was already moving. He pulled bread from the box, carved thick slices, opened a jar of preserved peaches and spooned them onto a plate. Cut a wedge of cheese. Set it all on the table in front of the boy, who sat with his hands in his lap, waiting. "Eat," Hunter said. The boy ate. Not fast, not the way Grace expected a hungry child to eat. He took careful bites, chewed slowly, as if he knew this might be the only meal he would have for a while and wanted to make it last. Grace stood by the stove, watching. Hunter moved around her, pulling a cloth from the drawer, wrapping more bread, more cheese. He reached into the tin box on the high shelf, the one Grace had not opened, and pulled out coins. Copper pennies. A few silver pieces. He slipped them into the cloth bundle. When the boy finished, Hunter handed him the bundle. The boy took it without surprise. This had happened before. Grace realized. Many times. "Tommy?" Hunter's voice was low. "Your pa's still drinking." The boy nodded. "You need anything else?" A shake of the head. Hunter walked him to the door. The boy stepped out into the afternoon light. The bundle clutched to his chest. At the tree line, he paused, looked back, raised one thin hand in a wave. Hunter lifted his own hand, the smallest motion. Then he dropped it and turned away. But Grace saw his throat move. She saw him swallow something down. "His mother died 2 years back," Hunter said. He did not look at her. "Fever took her. His father crawled into a bottle and never came out. Town knows. Town does nothing." He walked past her, out the back door, toward the wood pile. The axe started up again. Steady. Relentless. Grace stood in the empty cabin. The plate was still on the table. A few crumbs and a smear of peach syrup, all that remained. She picked it up, carried it to the basin, washed it slowly. That night, she could not sleep. She lit the candle and sat on the edge of her bed. Jane Eyre closed in her lap. The cabin was quiet. Hunter had gone to his room hours ago. She thought of Tommy's face, the careful way he had eaten, the wave at the tree line. She thought of Hunter's hand, rising and falling, the thing he had swallowed. On impulse, she rose, crossed to the shelf where she had seen the journals stacked. She should not look. She knew that. But her hand moved anyway. The first journal was full of figures, tallies of pelts, prices, dates, ordinary. The second was different. Pages of cramped handwriting, some entries dated, some not. She flipped through and stopped. A loose page tucked between the others. The handwriting was different, unsteady, childish. "Dear Mama," it began. I am writing you even though you cannot read this where you are. The teacher says heaven has no post office, but I do not believe her." Grace's breath caught. She turned the page over. At the bottom, in that same childish hand, your son, Hunter, age 9. The page trembled in her fingers. He had been writing to his dead mother since he was a child, and he had never stopped. She heard a floorboard creak in the hallway. Grace slid the letter back into the journal. Her hands moved fast, clumsy with guilt. The floorboard creaked again, closer now, and she shoved the journal onto the shelf and turned just as Hunter appeared in the doorway. He stood there in his union suit, barefoot, his hair loose around his face. His eyes went to her hands, then to the shelf behind her, then back to her face. She waited for anger, for accusation, for the cold wall to slam back into place. He said nothing. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, not softening, exactly, but a kind of resignation, as if he had known this moment would come and had simply been waiting. Then he turned and walked back down the hall. His door closed with a soft click. Grace stood alone in the candlelight, her pulse loud in her ears. She did not sleep that night. The storm came 3 days later. It rolled in from the west, black clouds piling against the mountains like something alive. Grace watched it approach from the cabin window, the wind picking up, bending the pines, sending the chickens scrambling for the coop. Hunter brought in extra wood and stacked it by the stove. He checked the shutters, secured the stable door. By noon, the rain came down in sheets. They sat in the main room, trapped by the weather. Hunter in his chair, carving. Grace on the bench by the fire. The quilt wrapped around her shoulders against the chill. The quilt she had found in the chest at the foot of her bed, folded with care. Smelling of cedar and something older, something like lavender and grief. Thunder rolled across the valley. The cabin shook. Grace pulled the quilt tighter and her fingers found the corner. Stitching there, small and precise. She traced it without thinking and felt letters beneath her fingertips. She looked down. A name, embroidered in thread that had once been blue, but had faded now to gray. Sarah. Her throat tightened. She looked up. Hunter had stopped carving. The knife rested on his knee. His eyes were on her hands, on the corner of the quilt, on the name she had uncovered. Who was Sarah? The question came out before she could stop it. The rain hammered the roof. The fire crackled and spit. Hunter did not answer. He sat very still, the way an animal goes still when it senses danger. The knife did not move. His hands did not move. Only his chest rose and fell. Slow and deliberate. Grace should have let it go. She knew that. Some doors were not meant to be opened. But she had seen the letter to his mother. She had watched him feed Tommy and wave goodbye with a hand that trembled. She had heard him singing to a wounded horse in the early morning light. "Please," she said. "I want to understand." The word hung between them. Please. She had not begged for anything in years. Hunter looked into the fire. The flames reflected in his eyes. Orange and gold. My wife. 2 words. His voice was rough, scraped raw. He did not look at her. Grace waited. The rain filled the silence. 5 years ago, he turned the knife over in his hands. The blade caught the firelight. She died in childbirth, The baby, too. He stopped. His jaw worked. The scar along his face seemed to deepen in the flickering light. I was hunting up on the North Ridge when it happened. 3 days out. Another pause. His knuckles whitened around the knife handle. By the time I got back, the words died. He shook his head once, sharp, as if trying to dislodge something stuck in his throat. Grace did not push. She sat with the quilt in her lap, Sarah's name beneath her fingers, and she waited. The midwife said it was too fast. Hunter's voice came out flat now, emptied of everything. Said there was nothing anyone could have done. But the town... He shook his head again. The town had their own ideas. What did they say? That I should have been there. That I should have fetched the doctor sooner. That if I had loved her the way a husband ought to, I would have stayed close to home. The knife turned in his hands. They said I was cold, strange, that something was wrong with me to leave a woman that far along. Grace watched his hands. The knuckles were white around the handle. My partner man named Edmund Cole, he had been waiting for an excuse. Hunter's voice dropped lower. We had a farrier business together in town. Good business. But he wanted it for himself. After Sarah died, he started talking. Told folks I was dangerous. Told them things about me that were not true. And people believed him because... He stopped, swallowed. Because it was easier to believe than to help. The fire popped. A log shifted, sending sparks up the chimney. The whispers got louder. Then they were not whispers anymore. Men I had shod horses for my whole life. They would not look at me. Women crossed the street when I walked by. His voice cracked, just slightly. He cleared his throat. Children ran when they saw me coming. Grace's chest ached. She thought of the way the shopkeeper's wife had looked at her in town. Poor thing. Married to that beast. So I came up here, Hunter said. Built this cabin with my own hands. Stopped going down unless I had to. Let them think whatever they wanted. He set the knife on the arm of the chair. Looked at the carved horse on the windowsill, the one Grace had noticed her first day. I was making that the night she died. For the baby. His voice was barely audible now. I never finished it. Every time I pick it up, I see her face. I hear her voice calling my name. And I was not there to answer. The rain eased for a moment, then came back harder. Grace rose from the bench. The quilt fell from her shoulders. She crossed the small space between them and sat on the floor beside his chair, not touching him, just there, present. He did not move away. They were wrong, she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. You were hunting to feed your family. That is what a man does. You could not have known. I should have known. I should have felt it. That is not how the world works. He looked at her then, really looked. His eyes were wet, the firelight catching the shine. She could see the boy who had written letters to his dead mother, the man who fed orphans and healed wounded horses and planted wildflowers beside his door. I do not know how else the world works, he said. I only know I was not there. Grace did not have an answer for that. Some wounds did not close with words. She knew that better than most. So she sat with him. The storm raged outside. The fire burned low. Neither of them moved. When the embers had turned to ash, and the rain had softened to a steady drumming, Hunter spoke again. Grace. Just her name. Nothing else. But it was the first time he had said it since she arrived. The first time it had sounded like something other than a formality. She looked up at him. His face was shadowed, exhausted, carved with grief. But his eyes were open. Unguarded. Seeing her. "Thank you," he said. "For staying." She nodded. She did not trust her voice. He rose and offered her his hand. She took it, his palm rough, warm, steady, and he helped her to her feet. Then he released her and stepped back. "Storm should pass by morning," he said. "You should sleep." She watched him walk to his room. The door closed behind him. Grace stood alone by the dying fire, her hand still warm where he had held it. On the windowsill, the unfinished horse caught the last glow of the embers. She thought of Sarah, of the baby who never drew breath, of 5 years of silence on this mountain. And she thought of the wildflowers by the door, planted with care, tended in secret. He had never stopped wanting something to live. The next morning, she would go to town for supplies. She had put it off long enough. The larder was running low, and there were things she needed: thread, soap, salt. But as she lay in bed, listening to the rain fade, a new thought crept in. What would the town say when they saw her? What would they tell her about the man she had married? The mule was old and slow, but it knew the trail. Grace held the rope loosely and let the animal pick its way down the mountain. The morning was cool, the sky washed clean by yesterday's storm. Puddles stood in the ruts of the path, reflecting the pale blue above. Her boots were already damp from crossing the creek at the halfway point. Hunter had not wanted her to go. He had said nothing, of course. But she had seen the way his jaw tightened when she announced her intention at breakfast, the way he glanced toward the trail and then away. He had offered to go himself a single word. But she had shaken her head. "I need to see the town," she said. "I need to know what I married into." He had not argued. He had simply nodded, helped her saddle the mule, and watched her ride down the path until the trees swallowed her from view. Now, 2 hours later, Copper Bend rose from the valley floor. It was smaller than she remembered. A single main street, unpaved, lined with false-fronted buildings that had seen better days. The general store, the saloon, a blacksmith shop with its doors standing open, the ring of hammer on iron drifting across the morning air, a church at the far end, its steeple white against the mountains. Grace tied the mule to the post outside the general store and climbed the wooden steps. The boards creaked under her weight. They always did. She had learned long ago to ignore that sound. The bell above the door jangled as she entered. The smell hit her first: coffee and tobacco and pickle brine and the dusty sweetness of fabric bolts. The store was dim after the brightness outside, and she stood blinking while her eyes adjusted. Barrels of flour and sugar lined one wall. Canned goods on shelves behind the counter. A glass case holding ribbons and buttons and small luxuries no one in this town could afford. The woman behind the counter looked up. "Mrs. Patterson." The shopkeeper's wife. Gray hair pulled back tight, apron starched stiff. Her eyes moved over Grace, taking in the plain dress, the travel dust, the wedding ring on her finger, and something shifted in her expression. "Mrs." The woman paused, as if the name itself was distasteful. "Mrs. Hunter, what can I get for you?" Grace kept her voice even. "Thread, white and brown, a bar of soap, 2 pounds of salt, a sack of coffee beans if you have them." Mrs. Patterson turned to gather the items. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Behind Grace, the bell jangled again. Footsteps, whispers. She did not turn around. "Heard you were up on the mountain now." Mrs. Patterson set the thread on the counter. "Living with that man?" "My husband." "Yes, husband." The word came out flat. "Poor thing. Your father must have been desperate indeed." Grace's fingers tightened on her coin purse. She said nothing. Mrs. Patterson leaned closer. Her breath smelled of coffee and something sour. "You be careful up there, girl. That man, he is not right. Never has been. What happened to his first wife?" "Died in childbirth." Grace's voice cut across the whisper. "I know the story." "Do you—" Mrs. Patterson's eyes glittered. "Do you know he left her alone for 3 days while he went hunting? Do you know she called for him at the end? And he was not there. Do you know what kind of man does that?" Grace thought of Hunter kneeling in the straw, singing to a wounded horse. She thought of the food he wrapped for Tommy, the letters he wrote to a mother who could not read them. "I know enough," she said. "The salt, please." Mrs. Patterson's mouth pressed into a thin line. She measured out the salt and wrapped it in brown paper. Grace paid. She gathered her purchases and turned toward the door. 3 men stood on the porch. They had not been there when she entered. She was certain of that. They stood in a loose half-circle, blocking the steps. Their hats pulled low against the morning sun. The one in the middle was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that might have been handsome 20 years ago before drink and meanness carved their marks into it. He smiled when he saw her. "Well now," his voice was thick with false friendliness. "The mountain bride herself. Come down to join civilized folk for a spell." Grace stopped in the doorway. Her packages pressed against her chest. "Excuse me, I need to pass." The man did not move. "Name is Edmund Cole. I was your husband's partner, once upon a time, before he showed his true colors." Edmund Cole. The name Hunter had spoken in the firelight. The man who had spread the rumors, who had taken the business, who had turned the town against him. Grace looked at him, took in the fine coat, the polished boots, the gold watch chain at his vest. He had done well for himself, built his comfort on another man's grief. "I know who you are," she said. "Then you know I have been patient." 5 years. That man has squatted on good land up on that mountain, land that could be put to use. Edmund stepped closer. His voice dropped. "There is silver in them hills, Mrs. Hunter, mineral rights worth a fortune. And he sits up there like a hermit, keeping it all to himself. The land is legally his. Legal." Edmund spat the word. "Legal does not mean right. Your husband is a killer. Ma'am, maybe not with his hands, but he killed that girl just the same. Left her to die alone. And the town has had enough of pretending otherwise." The 2 men behind him nodded. One of them younger, maybe 25, with a scraggly beard, shifted his weight and looked away. Grace set her packages on the porch railing. She straightened her spine. Her heart was pounding. but her voice came out steady. "What exactly did he kill?" "Mr. Cole?" Edmund blinked. "I told you, his wife. He was hunting, providing for his family, the way men do." The midwife said there was nothing anyone could have done. "You know that. Everyone knows that." "So what exactly did he kill?" Edmund's face reddened. "Now listen here. His own grief." Grace stepped forward. "Because that is the only thing I have seen him carrying. 5 years of it. Alone. While you stood down here telling stories and taking what was his." The younger man shifted again. His eyes flicked to Edmund, then to Grace, then to the ground. Edmund's smile had vanished. His jaw was tight, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "You do not know what you are talking about, woman. You have been up there. What? 2 weeks? 3? I knew him for years." "Then you should know better." Grace picked up her packages. "Now move. I am going home." For a long moment, nobody moved. The street had gone quiet. Grace could feel eyes on her from the windows. From the saloon porch across the way, the whole town was watching. Then a voice came from behind her. "Let her pass, Edmund." Grace turned. An old woman stood in the doorway of the dress shop next door. White hair pinned up beneath a black bonnet. A pearl brooch at her collar. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were sharp. "Mrs. Harker?" Edmund's tone changed. Respectful, almost wary. "This is not your concern. My daughter was Sarah's closest friend." Mrs. Harker stepped down from her porch. Her cane tapped against the boards. "I knew that boy when he was courting her. Kindest man I ever met. What happened to Sarah broke him in half. And you," she pointed her cane at Edmund, "you picked up the pieces and sold them for profit." Edmund's face went dark. "I do not have to listen to this." "No, you do not. But you will leave this woman alone, or I will make sure every person in this town remembers exactly how you came by that farrier shop." Mrs. Harker's voice was iron. "My late husband surveyed every claim in this valley. I still have his records." "Every one of them." Edmund stared at her, dared. Something passed between them, old grievance, old debts. Then he stepped aside. Grace walked down the steps. Her legs trembled, but she did not let it show. She untied the mule, mounted, and rode toward the edge of town without looking back. Mrs. Harker caught her arm before she could leave. The old woman's grip was surprisingly strong. "You did well, child." Her voice softened. "Sarah would have liked you." Grace swallowed. "Thank you. Ma'am, if Edmund causes trouble and he will you send word, Tommy knows where to find me." Mrs. Harker released her arm. "That boy on the mountain deserves better than what this town gave him. Maybe you are the one to give it." At the last building, she heard Edmund's voice carry across the street. "Tell your husband we are coming, soon, and when we do, no old woman is going to save him." Grace kicked the mule into a faster walk. The trail home had never seemed so long. When she finally crested the last ridge, the cabin came into view, and there, on the porch, stood Hunter, watching the trail, waiting. He had seen the dust cloud from her approach. He had been worried. Grace rode into the yard and dismounted. Hunter came down the steps. His eyes moved over her, checking for injury. She realized, making sure she was whole. "What happened?" he asked. She handed him the packages. Her hands were shaking now. The fear she had held back finally breaking through. "Edmund Cole," she said. "He knows about the mineral rights. He said they are coming up here. Soon." Hunter's face went still, the kind of still that comes before a storm. "How many?" "3 today. But he said we. There will be more." Hunter took the packages inside. Grace followed. He set them on the table and stood with his back to her, his hands flat on the wood. "You should not have gone alone. I needed to see. And now you have seen?" He turned. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "Now you know what they think of me, what they will always think." And Grace stepped closer. "I know what Mrs. Harker thinks. She said you were the kindest man she ever met." Something flickered in his face. A crack in the wall. "Mrs. Harker remembers. The rest of them," he shook his head. "The rest of them remember what Edmund told them to remember." Outside, the afternoon light was fading. The shadows stretched long across the yard. Somewhere in the stable, Hope nickered softly. Grace thought of Edmund's face, the hatred in it, the greed. "What will you do," she asked, "when they come?" Hunter looked at her. For a long moment, he did not speak. Then he walked to the door, opened it, and stared out at the mountain. "I do not know," he said. "I have spent 5 years running. I am not sure I know how to do anything else." The door stayed open. The wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke and something else rain coming. Maybe. Another storm on the way. Grace stood beside him. Not touching. Just there. "Maybe," she said quietly. "It is time to stop running." He did not answer, but he did not walk away. That night, neither of them slept. And in the morning, Tommy came up the trail walking and running through half the night with news that changed everything. Tommy came up the trail at a stumbling run. Grace saw him first. She was in the garden, pulling the last of the weeds from the corner plot, her hands black with soil. The boy burst from the tree line, his bare feet slapping against the packed earth, his chest heaving. He had walked and run through half the night. She could see it in the way his legs buckled, the way his face had gone gray beneath the dirt. "Mister," he was shouting before he reached the yard. "Mister, they're coming." Hunter emerged from the stable. His shirt was damp with sweat, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He crossed the yard in long strides and caught Tommy by the shoulders before the boy collapsed. "Slow down. Breathe." The boy gulped air. His face was streaked with dirt and dried tears. "Edmund Cole. He was at the saloon last night. I heard him talking." Tommy's voice cracked. "He's got papers, says they're legal, says you've got no right to this land. He's bringing men up here tomorrow. 6 of them. Maybe more." Hunter's hands dropped from the boy's shoulders. His face went still. "Tomorrow. First light. That's what he said." Tommy swayed on his feet. "He's been drinking and talking big, telling everyone you're a murderer and a thief and—" The boy stopped. His chin trembled. "I ran as soon as I could get away. I didn't know what else to do." Grace rose from the garden. Her knees ached. Dirt clung to her dress, her hands, the sweat on her face. She walked to where they stood and put her hand on Tommy's shoulder. "You did right," she said. "Come inside. You need water and rest." She led the boy to the cabin. Hunter did not follow. When she came back out, he was gone. She found him in the stable, pulling a leather bag from the shelf above the workbench. His movements were quick, efficient. He shoved a shirt into the bag, a knife, a coil of rope. His hands did not shake, but his jaw was set in a hard line. "What are you doing?" He did not look at her. "Leaving." The word hit her like a slap. "Leaving? If I go, they have no reason to bother you. Edmund wants the land, not a fight. Once I'm gone, he'll take what he came for and leave you alone. And where will you go?" He shoved another shirt into the bag. "Does it matter?" Grace stepped into the stable. The smell of hay and horse and leather surrounded her. Hope lifted her head from the stall, ears pricked forward. "You're running." "I'm doing what I should have done 5 years ago." Hunter yanked the bag's straps tight. "I should never have stayed. Should never have let you." He stopped. His hands went still on the leather. "Let me what?" He did not answer. Grace moved closer. Her boots scraped against the straw-covered floor. "Let me see who you really are. Let me sit with you by the fire while you carved. Let me watch you feed a hungry child and heal a wounded horse and stop. And write letters to your dead mother." His head came up. His eyes were dark, rimmed with exhaustion and something else. Something that looked like shame. "You read those letters?" It was not a question. "One of them, I'm sorry. I should not have." "No, you should not have." He turned away, picked up the bag. "But it does not matter now. None of it matters." He walked past her toward the door. Grace moved without thinking. She stepped in front of him, her body blocking the narrow doorway. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her hands trembled at her sides. "Move," he said. "No." "Grace, you're not running from them." Her voice shook. "You're running from—" She stopped, took a breath, started again. "I watched you. Every day. The way you care for that horse. The way you wrap food for Tommy. The flowers you leave on the table because you're too scared to hand them to me directly." His jaw tightened. The scar along his face seemed to deepen in the dim light. "You don't know what they're capable of. I know what you're capable of. And it scares you more than Edmund ever could." He stared at her. The bag hung from his hand. Forgotten. "Being seen," Grace said. "Being known. That's what scares you. The moment someone gets close enough to see the truth, you bolt. And what truth is that? That you're not the monster they made you out to be. That you never were." Hunter's breath caught. His throat worked. He looked away, looked at the ground, looked anywhere but at her. "Why do you care?" The words came out rough, broken. "Why does any of this matter to you?" Grace's chest ached. She thought of her father's face when he handed her the carpet bag, the way he had not looked at her, the way no one had ever looked at her. Because someone should have cared a long time ago. Her voice cracked. "And no one did. Not for you, not for me." The stable was silent. Outside, a bird called. Hope shifted in her stall, her hooves rustling the straw. Hunter set the bag down. His hand came up slowly, as if he were approaching a wild thing, and rested on the doorframe beside her head. He was close now. Close enough that she could see the pulse jumping in his throat, the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I've spent 5 years hiding up here," he said. The words came out rough, barely above a whisper. "Convincing myself I deserved to be alone, that if anyone got close, they'd see what the town saw." And what did the town see? A man who wasn't there when it mattered? A man who let his wife die alone? That's what Edmund told them to see. Grace did not look away. "It's not what I see." Something shifted in his face. The wall cracked not all the way, but enough. Enough to let something through. "Every time I let myself want something," he said, "it gets took from me. Sarah, the baby, my name, my work, everything I ever tried to hold on to. I know. I don't know how to stop being afraid." Grace looked up at him. The man who had faced down wolves and blizzards and 5 years of solitude. The man who could not meet her eyes. "You named the horse Hope," she said quietly. "You already know it's worth the risk." He did not speak. He did not move. But he did not leave. They stood in the doorway of the stable as the sun sank behind the mountains. The light turned gold, then orange, then the deep purple of dusk. Grace's legs ached from standing. Her dress was still filthy from the garden. Dirt ground into the fabric, smeared across her face. She must look a sight. She did not care. Inside, Tommy had fallen asleep on the bench by the stove, exhausted from his journey. Outside, the first stars appeared above the ridge. Hunter sat down on the stable floor, his back against the wall, his legs stretched out in front of him. He looked up at Grace and patted the space beside him. She lowered herself down. The boards were rough and cold through her dress. The smell of hay and horse surrounded them. Hope nickered softly from her stall. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say. Sometime in the night, Grace felt Hunter's hand find hers. His fingers rough and warm. He did not squeeze. He simply held on. She held on too. Dawn came slowly. Gray light crept through the gaps in the stable walls. Grace's neck was stiff. Her hip ached from sleeping on the hard floor. Straw clung to her hair. Her dress, the side of her face. She turned her head. Hunter was still there, still awake. His eyes were red-rimmed, shadowed with exhaustion. But he had not left. He had not packed his bag. He had stayed. "They will be here soon," he said. Grace rose. Her body protested, joints cracking, muscles tight. She brushed the straw from her dress and extended her hand. He took it, let her pull him to his feet. They walked out of the stable together. The morning air was cold and clean. Mist clung to the valley below. Somewhere in the distance, Grace could hear hoofbeats. Many hoofbeats. Coming up the trail? 6 riders came up the trail. Grace counted them as they emerged from the tree line. 6 horses, 6 men, dust rising behind them in the early light. Edmund Cole rode at the front, his coat brushed clean, his hat set at an angle that said he expected to win. Hunter stood on the porch. He had not moved since they heard the hoofbeats. His hands hung at his sides, empty. The rifle still gathered dust above the fireplace. He had not touched it. Grace stood beside him. Her dress was wrinkled, stained with dirt and straw. Her hair had come loose from its pins during the night in the stable. She had not had time to fix it. She did not care. Tommy pressed against the cabin wall behind them, his eyes wide, his thin body coiled to run. The riders stopped at the edge of the yard. Edmund dismounted first, his boots hitting the packed earth with a solid thump. He pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it up like a weapon. "Hunter." His voice carried across the morning air. "I have here a legal document stating that your claim to this land was improperly filed. You have until noon to gather your belongings and vacate the property." Hunter did not respond. His jaw was tight, the scar white against his skin. Grace stepped forward. Her boots found the first step, the second. She walked down into the yard, putting herself between Hunter and the men on horseback. "Before you evict anyone," she said, "you will hear the truth." Edmund's smile flickered. "The truth, ma'am. I have known this man for 15 years. I know the truth better than—" "You know stories." Grace's voice cut through his. "Stories you told, stories that served you. But you do not know the man who lives on this mountain." She turned to face the riders. 5 men still mounted, their faces shadowed by their hats. Some she recognized from town: the blacksmith's apprentice, the man who ran the livery stable. Others were strangers. All of them looked uncomfortable, shifting in their saddles, avoiding her eyes. "Do any of you know what this man does with his days?" She did not shout. She did not plead. She simply spoke. "Do you know that 3 weeks ago, he found a mare on the North Trail with her leg torn open by old trapping wire? She would have died. He carried her back here. He has been treating her wounds every morning and every night since then." One of the riders, a man with a gray beard, glanced toward the stable. "Do you know about the boy?" Grace pointed toward the cabin, where Tommy's pale face peered around the corner. "That child's mother died 2 years ago. His father drinks himself blind every night. The town knows. The town does nothing. But this man, the one you call a murderer, he feeds that boy. He gives him money for food, for clothes. He has done it for months, in secret, because he knows what it is like to have no one." Edmund's face darkened. She is saying what he told her to say. The man is a manipulator. "He never told me anything." Grace turned to face Edmund directly. Her hands were steady now. The trembling had stopped somewhere between the porch and the yard. "He never told me about his wife. He never told me about the baby. He never told me why he came up here or why he stayed. I watched. I paid attention. That's the difference between us. Mr. Cole." Edmund's mouth opened, then closed. Behind him, the riders exchanged glances. Grace looked at each man in turn. The gray-bearded one, who had glanced toward the stable. The blacksmith's apprentice, barely 20, his hands tight on his reins. The livery man, who would not meet her eyes. 2 others she did not know. Their faces hard, but uncertain. "I found letters in his cabin," she said. "Letters he wrote to his mother. She died when he was a child. He has been writing to her ever since, telling her about his life, asking for her guidance, saying he misses her." The blacksmith's apprentice shifted in his saddle, his horse sidestepped, sensing his discomfort. "I found a wooden horse on the windowsill. He was carving it the night his wife died. For the baby, he never finished it. He cannot bring himself to finish it, because every time he picks it up, he sees her face. Edmund stepped forward. Enough. This is sentimentality, nothing more. The law is the law, and this document, let me see it. The voice came from the trail behind the riders. Everyone turned. Mrs. Harker sat in a borrowed buggy, her black bonnet stark against the morning sky. She held the reins in gloved hands, her face set in hard lines. Beside her on the seat was a leather case, old and cracked at the corners. Tommy's little sister came to my door before dawn, Mrs. Harker said as she climbed down from the buggy with the careful movements of age. Her cane found the ground, and she walked through the line of mounted men as if they were not there. The document, Edmund. He hesitated. His eyes flicked to the riders, to Grace, to Hunter standing silent on the porch. Then he handed it over. Mrs. Harker unfolded the paper. Her eyes moved across the words. Her lips pressed thin. This claims the original survey was filed incorrectly. She looked up at Edmund. That the boundary markers were placed in the wrong location. That is correct. The land office confirmed. My husband was the surveyor who placed those markers. Mrs. Harker's voice was cold. He did that work himself, 40 years ago. I have his original records here. She patted the leather case. Every measurement, every notation, every signature. Edmund's face went pale beneath the trail dust. You forged this document, Edmund. You paid someone at the land office to create a paper that would give you what you wanted. Mrs. Harker held up the document. This seal is wrong. The format is wrong. My husband kept copies of every survey he ever filed, and this does not match. Silence fell over the yard. The horses shifted. A bird called from the tree line. Grace looked at the riders. The gray-bearded man had taken off his hat. The livery man was staring at Edmund with something like disgust. The blacksmith's apprentice, the youngest, sat very still, his face working through something complicated. I did not know. The young man's voice cracked. Mr. Cole said the papers were real. He said we were just making sure the law was followed. Edmund spun toward him. Shut your mouth, boy. No. The young man shook his head. His hands trembled on the reins. I came here because you said this man was a murderer. You said he was dangerous. But all I see is a woman defending her husband and an old lady calling you a liar. He swung down from his horse. His boots hit the ground, and he stood there, hat in hand, looking at Hunter on the porch. I was just a kid when your wife died. Mister, I did not know her. I did not know you. I only knew what people told me. He swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed in his thin throat. I am sorry. I should not have come. He turned and walked toward the trail, leading his horse behind him. The gray-bearded man watched him go. Then he looked at Edmund long and hard and dismounted. I'm done, Cole. Whatever you're selling, I ain't buying no more. He followed the young man down the trail. One by one, the others dismounted. The livery man, the two strangers. They did not speak to Edmund. They did not look at him. They simply turned their horses and walked away. Edmund stood alone in the yard. His forged document hung limp in Mrs. Harker's hand. His face was red, mottled with fury and humiliation. This is not over, he said. His voice shook. I will find another way. You will do nothing. Mrs. Harker stepped closer to him. Her cane pressed into the dirt between his boots. I have copies of every lie you have told for the past 5 years, every business deal you stole, every widow you cheated, every man whose reputation you destroyed to line your pockets. She leaned in. Her voice dropped to a whisper that Grace could barely hear. "The territorial marshal will want to see these forged papers. Go home, Edmund. Go home and pray that the people of Copper Bend are more forgiving than you deserve." Edmund's mouth worked. No sound came out. He looked around the yard at Grace, at Hunter, at the empty spaces where his men had stood, and something in him seemed to deflate. His shoulders dropped. He looked smaller somehow. He walked to his horse, mounted, rode down the trail without looking back. The dust settled. The morning grew quiet. Mrs. Harker turned to face the porch. Hunter had not moved. His face was unreadable, but his hands, Grace noticed, were shaking. "Well," Mrs. Harker said. She tucked the forged document into her case and pulled out a small leather-bound book. "I believe I have something that belongs here." She held out the book. Grace walked toward her and took it. "Sarah's diary," Mrs. Harker said. "She gave this to my daughter the week before she passed. My daughter kept it safe all these years." The old woman's voice softened. "There is an entry near the end. The week before she died. I think you should read it." Grace held the diary. The leather was soft beneath her fingers, warm from being pressed against the old woman's side. "And now," Mrs. Harker said, straightening her bonnet, "I believe I was promised coffee the last time I visited this mountain. That was 7 years ago. I hope you have learned to make a decent cup by now." Hunter stared at her. His mouth opened, closed. Then, for the first time since Grace had known him, he laughed. It was a rough sound, rusty from disuse, but real. It broke something open in his face, smoothed the hard lines around his eyes. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I reckon I have." He went inside to put the coffee on. Grace stood in the yard, holding Sarah's diary. The late morning light slanted golden across the mountains. Tommy had emerged from his hiding place and was running toward the stable, calling for Hope. Mrs. Harker came to stand beside her. "You did well, child." The old woman's voice was softer now. "Sarah would have liked you." Grace's throat tightened. She did not trust herself to speak. "Read the entry when you are ready," Mrs. Harker said, "and the one after it. You will understand." She walked toward the cabin, her cane tapping against the ground. Grace stood alone in the yard, holding the diary. From inside, she heard the clatter of cups, the scrape of the coffee pot. Hunter's voice, low and rough, saying something to Tommy. She opened the diary to the marked page. The handwriting was delicate, slanted. The ink had faded to brown. The entry began, "I am afraid of what is coming. But when I look at my husband, I am not afraid of him. I have never been afraid of him. He is the safest place I have ever known." Grace read the words twice, 3 times. Then she turned the page, and her breath caught. The next entry was dated the day Sarah died, and it was not in Sarah's handwriting. The handwriting was cramped, shaky, a man's hand by one, not a woman's. Grace read the words slowly. "She is gone. The baby, too. I was not here. I should have been here. The midwife says it happened fast, that there was nothing anyone could have done. But I do not believe her. I should have stayed. I should have known. Sarah, I am so sorry. I will be sorry until I die." The entry was signed with a single letter H. Grace closed the diary. Her hands were trembling. She looked up at the cabin, where Hunter stood in the doorway, a cup of coffee in each hand. He was watching her. He had written in Sarah's diary, the day she died. He had taken her book and poured his grief into its pages, as if putting the words there might let her read them somehow. Grace walked toward him. Each step felt heavy, weighted with understanding. She climbed the porch steps and stopped in front of him. Mrs. Harker gave me Sarah's diary. His face went still. The cups trembled slightly in his hands. I read the last entry, Grace said. Both of them. He set the cups on the porch railing. His eyes dropped to the ground between them. The scar along his jaw seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. I did not know what else to do. His voice was barely audible. I could not. I had no one to talk to. She was gone. The baby was gone. And her diary was there, on the nightstand, where she always kept it. He stopped, swallowed. I needed her to know. Grace reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough, calloused, warm. He flinched at the contact but did not pull away. She knew, Grace said. She wrote about you. The week before she died, she said you were the safest place she had ever known. Something broke in his face. Not the wall this time, something deeper. His eyes grew wet. His jaw worked, fighting for control. I was not there. You were hunting, providing for your family. That is what husbands do. It was not enough. It was everything you could give. Grace squeezed his hand, and she knew that. She wrote it down. She wanted someone to find it someday. Maybe she wanted you to find it. Hunter looked at her. Really looked. The morning light caught his face, softening the hard lines, illuminating the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. He was not the man the town whispered about. He had never been that man. He was just someone who had lost everything and did not know how to stop grieving. I spent 5 years believing I did not deserve to be seen, he said, Betty, that if anyone got close, they would see what the town saw. A monster. A failure. A man who could not protect the people he loved. Grace stepped closer. Their hands were still joined, his fingers tightening around hers. You saw me anyway, he said, from the first day. You looked at me, and you did not flinch. I know what it is like to be unseen. The words came out quiet, steady. I know what it is like to walk through the world believing you are not worth looking at. 25 years the Lord made me this way, and 25 years of being the one no one wanted, the one they married off to settle a debt. Hunter's free hand came up, slowly, carefully, as if she might startle. His palm rested against her cheek. His thumb brushed the corner of her eye, where a tear had escaped without her noticing. You are worth looking at, Grace. You are worth more than anyone in that town ever understood. She leaned into his touch, closed her eyes, let herself feel the warmth of his hand, the roughness of his skin, the steadiness of his presence. For the first time in her life, she believed it. Mrs. Harker stayed for coffee. They sat on the porch, the three of them, while Tommy explored the stable and made friends with Hope. The old woman talked about Sarah, how she had laughed, how she had loved to read, how she had met Hunter at a church social and known within the hour that she would marry him. Hunter listened. His face was open now, unguarded. Tears slipped down his cheeks, but he did not wipe them away. He let them fall. "She would have liked you," Mrs. Harker said to Grace. "She had a way of seeing people for who they really were. Just like you do." Grace did not know how to respond. She looked at Hunter instead. He met her eyes and nodded. Just slightly, an acknowledgement, a thank you. When the coffee was gone, Mrs. Harker rose to leave. She paused at the edge of the porch and turned back. "Sunday supper," she said. "My house? 6 o'clock? Both of you?" Hunter's face flickered with surprise. "Ma'am, I have not been. 5 years is long enough." Mrs. Harker's voice was firm. "It is time you came home." She climbed into her buggy and drove down the trail without looking back. Hunter stood at the porch railing, watching until she disappeared around the bend. Then he turned to Grace. "Sunday supper." He said the words like they belonged to a foreign language. "I have not eaten a meal with anyone from town since Sarah." He nodded. Grace moved to stand beside him. The valley stretched out below, green and gold in the afternoon light. The mountains rose beyond, their peaks still touched with mist. "We will go together," she said. "If you want." He was quiet for a long moment. Then his hand found hers again. Their fingers interlocked, palm pressed to palm. "I want." Tommy came running from the stable, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. the horse, hope she let me brush her. She ate an apple right out of my hand." Hunter smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. "She has good taste. Can I come back tomorrow? Can I help with her bandages?" "If your father does not need you." Tommy's face fell for just a moment. Then he straightened his thin shoulders. "He will not notice. He never notices." Grace knelt in front of the boy. "Tommy, how would you like to stay for supper?" His eyes went wide. "Really? Really? And if your father does not notice you are gone," she glanced at Hunter, "maybe you could bring your sister next time. I hear she is even younger than you." Tommy's whole body seemed to light up. "Lily, she is 7. She would love the horse. She would love everything." He ran back toward the stable, shouting something about brushing Hope's mane. Hunter watched him go. His expression was soft, unguarded. "You are good with him," he said. "Someone has to be." That evening, they sat on the porch together. The sun sank behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deep purple. The wildflowers along the steps swayed in the evening breeze. From the stable, Hope nickered softly. Tommy had fallen asleep on the bench inside, exhausted and full. Grace leaned against the porch post. Her body ached from the long day, but it was a good ache. The ache of work done, of battles won. Hunter sat beside her. He had brought the carved horse from the windowsill, the one he had been making for the baby who never came. He held it in his hands, turning it over, studying the unfinished lines. "I want to finish it," he said. "Someday." Grace looked at the small figure, the shape of a horse, half-formed, waiting. "Someday soon. Maybe." He glanced at her. Something moved in his eyes, a question, a hope, a fear. Maybe, he said. The stars came out one by one. The air grew cool. Grace pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Hunter rose and went inside. He came back a moment later with the quilt, Sarah's quilt, and draped it over both their shoulders. They sat close together, the warmth of the fabric surrounding them, the warmth of each other even closer. Grace. She turned her head. His face was inches from hers. The scar along his jaw was pale in the starlight. His eyes were dark, deep, unguarded. Thank you, he said. For staying, for seeing, for standing up when everyone else walked away. She did not have words, so she did not use them. She leaned into him instead, her head resting against his shoulder, her hand finding his beneath the quilt. They sat that way for a long time. The night deepened around them. The fire inside burned low. Somewhere around midnight, Hunter spoke again. I never thought I would feel this way again. Grace lifted her head, looked at him, and there it was. A smile. A real smile. Not the small, guarded thing she had seen before. This was different. This was full. It changed his whole face, smoothed the hard lines, softened the grief. It reached his eyes and stayed there. She had never seen him look like that. So that is what lives in your eyes, she said softly. I wondered. He laughed. A real laugh, rough and rusty, but real. And then he pulled her closer, and the quilt wrapped around them both, and the stars wheeled overhead, and the mountain held them safe. In the morning, Grace moved her things into the main bedroom. She did not ask permission. She did not make a speech. She simply gathered her carpet bag and her spare dress and the book he had given her, and she carried them down the hall to the room where Hunter slept. He was standing by the window when she entered. He turned, saw her, saw the carpet bag in her hand. He did not speak. He simply nodded, and then he crossed the room and took the bag from her and set it on the chair in the corner, next to his own things. That afternoon, Tommy brought Lily. The little girl was thin, like her brother, with the same two old eyes. But when she saw Hope in the stable, her face transformed. She laughed a bright, clear sound and ran to the horse's side, reaching up to touch her nose. Hunter knelt beside her and showed her how to hold her hand flat, palm up, so Hope could take the apple without nipping her fingers. Grace watched from the stable door. The late afternoon light slanted through the gaps in the walls, catching dust motes, catching the gold in Hunter's hair. He looked up, caught her watching, and smiled. That same smile, the one that changed everything. Grace smiled back. The cabin on the mountainside had been quiet for 5 years. A place of grief and solitude and waiting. Now it was full of sound. Tommy's chatter, Lily's laughter, Hope's soft nickering, the crackle of the fire, the bubble of stew, the scrape of chairs as everyone gathered for supper. Grace sat at the table, surrounded by noise and warmth and life. Across from her, Hunter met her eyes. He reached across the table and took her hand. On the windowsill behind him, the carved horse sat in the fading light, still unfinished, but waiting for some day. There is something quiet that settles after a story like this one. A heaviness in the chest that is not quite sadness, not quite relief. Perhaps it is the weight of recognition. The familiar ache of remembering someone we once were, or someone we loved, or someone we failed to see clearly until it was too late. Many of us have stood where Grace stood on the outside of a room, waiting to be noticed. Some of us have been Hunter, carrying a grief so heavy we forgot how to set it down. And perhaps all of us, at one time or another, have been the Town. Looking away because looking closer asked too much of us. These things do not need to be resolved tonight. They are allowed to rest, unfinished, the way real wounds do, the way real love does. It is enough to have listened. It is enough to have remembered. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for letting this story sit with you, even in the places where it was hard to hold.